Was it a fast assault on free media, or was it all a storm in a teacup? That's the question after a tumultuous few hours where the media industry and journalists were busy decoding a Press Information Bureau release on fake news and then the subsequent withdrawal. The press release issued last evening said that any journalist accused of peddling fake news would have their accreditation suspended for 15 days, and if they were found guilty, this would be suspended for even longer. Top journalists called out the directive for an attempt to pressurize media in an election year. This morning, that directive was withdrawn on direction from the Prime Minister's office, no less. So what exactly happened in those few hours? Why was there a need for the government to step in and try and find a punishment for fake news within its jurisdiction? And of course, the big question, is there enough clarity on what defines fake news? To speak on this, I'm joined by senior journalists Siddharth Vardarajan, Pratik, Sinha and Nirwa, Mehta. Between them, of course, Siddharth Vardarajan is with The Wire, Pratik Sinha is co-founder of Alt News, and Nirwa Mehta is from Op India. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us on Bloomberg Quint. I'm going to start with Mr. Siddharth Vardarajan on the question of what was the reasoning behind the huge furore we saw on social media. I read your piece as well, which details and within it also says that actually very few journalists have this government accreditation. And not having it has not really stopped anyone from reporting. What was the real fear, Mr. Vardarajan?
No, I didn't say that very few journalists have accreditation. I'm saying that accreditation is an essential part of a journalist having access to government offices and government events increasingly, and that if accreditation were to be jeopardized, then this affects the journalist's ability to function. So far from looking to restrict or suspend accreditation, what the government actually needs to be doing is to loosen its credential system so that digital media, which today is not entitled to accreditation, is also brought within the tent. So I think that it's not on for the government to try to suspend or threaten the accreditation of journalists or entire media houses in this manner. And it was my reading, and it remains so, that this is an attempt to essentially compromise the ability of journalists to do their job.
Pratik, what would you say on this? Because it is about what the cause is and what the action is. If you go by that release, which has now, of course, been withdrawn, it says that fake news is the problem, and the penalty that the government found, or that particular ministry found for it, was to impact accreditation of journalists. Not all journalists have this, especially those who cover, government and certain ministries need it. Was the cause and effect a little out of place, and was that what raised a lot of concerns?
It was definitely out of place. I mean, the government completely overlooked the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is fake news that is propagated on social media, on web portals like Postcard News, Hindutva.info, Bharat.org, and such, many of these portals which are routinely propagating fake news, and the same thing makes its way to WhatsApp, Facebook, and then videos which are posted with the twisted narrative. Now, that is the biggest issue that we are facing today. Yes, mainstream media also has an issue where they put out misinformation/disinformation, but not, very, very often it is not out of a position of malice. What we have seen in case of social media is that, and especially websites like Postcard News, which are repeat offenders of putting out communally divisive fake news, they have weaponized fake news, so to say. And, that is coming out of a position of malice, and which is what we needed to look at. And if you see what has happened across the globe, many countries have actually put out elaborate steps. They have set up committees. They have done a lot to actually address this issue. And while all the countries across the globe are taking this issue in such a serious manner, what we see is a 4-para press release. Now, this is the most shoddy attempt at handling this. Recently, if you look up YouTube, Singapore government had a whole day seminar between representatives of Facebook, Twitter, mainstream media in Singapore, and government officials were, discussing this issue. And so that is a seriousness with which we need to address this issue, and not just a 4-para press release.
I want to bring in Nirwa Mehta here. She's a young journalist with Op India. And Nirwa, the strange thing about all the reactions is, on any issue, including this one, and even among journalists, is how everything has become so polarized. Everyone's response depends on not only which website they are from or which publication or where their leaning seems to be. Now, what is your reading on what has transpired in the last 24 hours?
Well, major thing that has transpired is that suddenly all the senior and 5-star journalists are rattled. Why are they so much worried about cracking down on fake news? Did they themselves indulge in fake news peddling? We do have instances where fake news were tweeted and by senior journalists, let me not take the names, but yeah. So why are they so rattled? I think that is one thing that nobody is even, seeing and questioning, especially when they are the champions of let us bust the fake news, and they've been talking about how, fake news are spread, how social media is used as a political tool for spreading propaganda. But they themselves indulge in it. We've seen it in UP elections last year. So it's very surprising how that happens.
Let me get Pratik Sinha to respond to that. Nirva's point is that why was there such a big reaction to this?
Is this a question addressed to me?
Yes. I want you to respond to what Nirva has just seen as her reading of the situation, and the question she has raised is that why are senior journalists who should be champions of actual news and fighting against fake news, why do they seem rattled, in her words, by this directive?
Well, I can't speak for others, but there's a definite cause of concern here, because as I said, this is here they're not even defining what is fake news. Fake news is not a phrase which can just be put around, and especially when you're talking about penalizing journalists, etc. So this needs a much more serious discussion. So as I said, it's a very shoddy attempt, and so it is ignoring the elephant in the room. So what it comes across is that it's an attempt to muzzle the press. So that is why so many people have actually voiced their concerns about this, and especially when it comes to mainstream media, you have a byline, who's the owner of the organization, who's running the organization. So there are people where accountability can be fixed. But in case of social media, there's no accountability. So that is where the main issue is.
Okay, so let's bifurcate this into a couple of things. The fact is that the action that was proposed and now which has been withdrawn is largely on mainstream media, which will come under the Press Council of India and the NBA. It is not for digital media, and in one of the questions, the minister even clarified, saying that there is some kind of a committee which is being formed to look at digital media separately. So what is fake news is what we will come to. But my point to Nirva is that if there was nothing to worry about, how do you read the response from the Prime Minister's office withdrawing it within just a few hours? Isn't that prima facie an indication that this was something which was not well thought out?
Well, maybe he's not that much of a dictator that people think he is. But jokes apart, I think maybe they are, since they said that they would rather route it through Press Council of India and the NBA and other such independent bodies, which till yesterday were independent and now no longer independent, according to senior journalists. So we do hope that things are taken care of, more streamlined, and the directive hasn't been completely withdrawn. It just will be channelized, from what I understand, it will just be channelized through proper means.
I think what has been reported widely so far, Nirva, is that this whole point of, accreditation being suspended for 15 days, even on a complaint, does not stand as of now. At least that's what I have understood. I don't know if Pratik has information to the contrary. But let me come to the question of what is fake news and how would you define it? Pratik, that is, a question which the world faces. Your website is also based on busting a lot of fake news or fact checks, as you call them, which, maybe even some political leader claiming something which is not correct. Do you think that it has now, the time has now come to define what is fake news?
I lost the audio for a bit. I did not hear the last bit.
Okay, my question to you is, has the time now come to define fake news, and if so, who would do this?
So there is a global definition for fake news. There are international fact-checking organizations like First Draft, there is a Pointer. So they are already defined what is fake news. So, that is something that we can adopt. And, the Indian context is slightly different, where a lot of communally divisive fake news is being propagated. So we can adopt that definition and then use that for purposes with slight modifications.
Nirva, what would you think of about fake news right now? Because there has been so much controversy over the last few days with the arrest of a journalist from, a website called Postcard. There are accusations and counter-accusations flying over what is fake news and what is not. Is there really no clear way of defining fake news? Clearly, it's when someone is misrepresenting the facts. Why has that line gotten so blurred?
I don't know. I think it has to do with, intention should matter when you post a news. Considering the Postcard editor was arrested for the news, it sounds like a broken record, but then so many other, there was a news posted by a senior journalist claiming that a woman was gang raped for eating beef in Haryana. It was fake news. So was it? How do you define that? And nothing, no action against her, no arrests, and nothing at all. So why are the rules different? Shouldn't they be similar across political spectrums?
Has the entire fake news conversation moved away from what it actually is and been caught up in what is essentially a political fight?
Well, it is a political fight. It has come across as a political fight because, it is, according to the work that we have done at Alt News, it cannot be denied that there is more amount of fake information in the right-wing ecosystem. But I want to come back to, the point that Nirwa made about, let's say, for example, this journalist. And so, yes, this journalist put out a tweet which has still not been deleted, that a woman was gang raped for eating beef, and which the police said that no such event has happened. But if you look at the tweet itself, it has got, I have the tweet open in front of me, and it has got 75 retweets. Now, while if you look at the Postcard news stories, what they do is they create multiple pages. They'll have a page called Postcard News, they'll have a page called I Support Ajit Doval, they'll have a page called I Support Narendra Modi, and like that they create tens and tens of pages through which the information is pushed out. And many of these pages have from anywhere from the range of 500,000 to 1 million followers. So the difference that needs to be drawn here is that this journalist, who, yes, put out information which was unchecked, but did not at any point in time attempt to make this viral. While in case of all these fake news websites like Postcard News, there is a constant attempt to make it viral so that more and more people read this misinformation. So that is the difference that needs to be drawn.
Is that how you would define fake news? By the attempt to make it viral? Or would it be a question of intent? Knowing that something is incorrect and still propagating it, or propagating it without knowing? You must admit that there is a lack of clarity.
No, so the way you define it is, yes, people make mistakes. Mainstream, there are journalists, etc., who also make mistakes. Many times they apologize for their mistakes, they withdraw their stories, and so on and so forth. But the problem here is that web portals like Postcard News, they do so repeatedly. They simply go and delete the stories whenever it is found to be fake. There's never an apology, never an accountability. But that is not the case with mainstream media organizations. So what we have to see is where it is easier to fix accountability. Yes, in mainstream media, you can fix accountability. There is misinformation, yes, and mainstream media has to find a way of self-regulating themselves and dealing with this issue. But in case of online portals like Postcard News, there is no way to regulate that. And I'm not saying that there should be regulation, but especially when there is information that is put out which can, I'll give you a quick example. For example, when riots were happening in Dakshin Kannada, Postcard News puts out a story that a boy called Paresh Mehta, whose body was fished out from the lake, he was castrated, he was burned with boiling oil. Now, when the postmortem report came out, this was completely false. Now, at a time when riots are happening in a place, when you put out such fake news, it can lead to the riots becoming more intense, or the tension going on for much longer. So that is the real problem. And as I said, these websites, they push out.
Then let's come to the question, because I don't want to get into these websites and those websites. If there is a rule, a law, a process tomorrow, it would look at each website or each newspaper or each news channel in its individual capacity, one would assume. But Nirva, I want to know what your views would be on self-regulation versus any attempt, and we did see some sort of an attempt for the government to step in and regulate the media in any way. As a journalist, do you agree with a concept of what was proposed, where the government would have a say in some kind of penalty, even if it is suspending accreditation for fake news? It is, in a way, an attempt to regulate the media, isn't it?
Well, I think we need to have independent bodies regulating news that are spread, obviously. When it comes to, for example, Pratik just mentioned how news items just get deleted on Postcard when they're called out. He also said that these things don't really happen as much in mainstream media. Last week, that happened in a publication where, in a completely irrelevant story on missionaries in Uttar Pradesh, there was a very obscure paragraph on rising intolerance in Yogi Adityanath against the
minorities.
It was completely irrelevant, and once it was pointed out, they deleted that paragraph without any explanations. All right. So all these missing stories, we can go pointing fingers at each other all day long, and we'll still have more stories. More than anything, I think we really need to stop really so much of hatred. Anything that happens, the moment someone makes a mistake, it is pointed out as fake news, fake news, fake news, and people go absolutely insane, including people who are, it's just a very vicious and vile circle out there. Maybe if people generally be a little nicer to each other, even when you are trying to point out mistakes, there is no civility out there.
Okay, at the end of the day, journalists serve their viewers and their readers. So I think the first responsibility needs to be towards, the consumers of the news that we put out. In that sense, we'll really have to think about an effective way to make sure that the highest journalistic standards are set. How will you sift mistake from intent? Well, that's a tricky one. Which I think the world really is thinking about right now. But I'll have to end this conversation here. Thank you so much, Nirwa Mehta and Pratik Sinha, for joining us.
Sir,